So, Corey, you used to be a short seller.
Yeah.
You did forensic research.
Yes.
You now cover tech. Your best question for Jim Chanos.
I got about 1,000, but well, I want to know what names you're doing work on, because when I watch you on these shows do these things, and I don't talk to you much, you know, I know you for your great individual research on names, and maybe you're reticent to talk about those sometimes, but I'm always curious what names you're working on.
Well, I'm not going to reveal anything I shouldn't, but I will say that one of the areas we're most interested in right now, similar to what got us interested in Hewlett-Packard, which was the autonomy acquisition,
right,
is companies that are growing by ever larger acquisitions.
Roll-ups.
Rollers. And increasingly now, we're seeing the point in some of these companies where they're having to make, you know, the acquisition too far, which was Tyco's problem 10 years ago, and where, in order to keep the game going, the momentum going of new orders, new revenues, and some of them don't even have profits, they're having to do bigger and bigger deals.
Would you let me guess one?
You can guess all day. I'm not going to tell you.
Well, let's try. Why don't you guess one?
Well, so IBM is an interesting company that's seen revenues falling, and they've done a ton of acquisitions, and it's...
Do you have a pen? Can I write that one down?
Yes.
You know what the symbol is?
Or no, it's like HPQ. No, it's IBM. It's a different company. Again, I'm not saying, I'm just guessing. 3D Systems, another company, stock straight up and to the right. They've done a ton of acquisitions. The acquisitions are interesting.
Well, both those companies that you describe are doing exactly what you're saying.
I didn't even see a link.
Whether or not we're looking at them is a different issue. There's a number of them in tech with very, very large market caps now where the organic growth is slowing down or negligible. And in fact, they're just trying to buy their way into growth, and it's fooling this generation of analysts.
Well, let's talk about...
the reality will come in.
Let's talk about Apple, then. That's a name you're involved with on the long side that's been criticized for not making enough acquisitions.
Right.
They've got too much dough.
Yeah, they have that quaint notion of developing their own products internally with their own design teams, as opposed to some of these companies who basically... and you've heard me complain about this, probably Corey understands this concept better than most, that companies that in tech that acquire lots of companies basically are capitalizing their R&D. Instead of expending the money internally like Apple and Samsung does, and particularly Samsung, which has multiples of R&D spending relative to Western companies.
So it sort of fundamentally hurts if they're doing their own R&D, it's hurting their operating margins. The accounting rules gives them the benefit.
Exactly.
And then the knuckleheads who don't consider acquisitions as part of free cash flow. Right. I think the free cash flow still looks good.
I think the free cash flow looks good, and thus Dell or Hewlett-Packard or IBM, as you mentioned. But if you actually look at acquisitions as R&D, capitalized R&D, suddenly a lot of these companies look a lot more expensive than they do on the surface.
Jim, how about one of the more old-fashioned screening systems for overvalued stocks? Companies that are trading at nosebleed valuations whose earnings growth can't possibly justify it.
I don't know any companies like that.
There are no such companies. You've talked before about Netflix. That makes the list. Pandora makes that list. Salesforce.com makes that list. Yeah. Amazon.com, in some people's eyes, belongs on that list. Yeah. What do you think about those companies?
Well, the problem, not with Amazon and to a lesser extent with Netflix, but some of the other ones you mentioned right now, is that retail investors have fallen in love with concepts again. And they've fallen in love with concepts with limited floats. Thus, Pandora announcing last night this
limited floats, meaning not enough
shares outstanding. So the whole world can get very, very excited about a Pandora or you know, a company that makes electric cars or whatever you might want to say.
That was one that came to mind.
And if there's only 1 million shares out there, a couple million shares outstanding, as opposed
in public hands, right?
In public hands, as opposed to hundreds of millions outstanding, which inexorably will get onto the market through VC distributions, venture capital distributions, 144 insider sales, and this is what happened in '99, 2000. As these stocks went higher and higher, there was suddenly a flood of issuance.
So Netflix doesn't fall into that camp.
Well, they've been around for a while.
But Pandora, to that point, the sellers at Pandora are some of the private investors, Crosslink.
VCs, right?
The VCs selling 4 million shares in the filing yesterday. With the stock straight up and to the right, they're looking at the prospects of the company.
You're short Pandora, correct?
We're not commenting on whether we're short Pandora, but the point is that a lot of these stocks, Stephanie, are trading on very, very limited floats. So even though they have big market caps, the amount of tradable shares is limited. And that's going to change, we think, pretty dramatically in the fourth quarter of 2013 and into 2014 if the prices stay where they are. It just makes a lot of sense for the original investors to diversify.
So the timing issue is one that I have suffered from personally greatly, lost sleep on, and I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore. But I wonder how you look at, do you wait, for example, for the secondary, for the time that those guys are getting out to get in, or do you get in early and just increase size as the position goes against you? And similarly, I wonder how you look at a company like a Tesla, which has a very high short interest. The stock has done nothing but go straight up and to the right. A lot of the bulls in the stock think the valuation is stretched, to be kind.
Yeah.
How do you figure out timing?
Well, it's the $64 million zillion question on the short side. If we could time these things perfectly, there'd be no fun in the process.
Yeah, it's so much fun.
In any case, I think that it's a mixture of things. I mean, is the business deteriorating? I mean, we pointed out over and over and over again, our very best shorts historically have been stocks that have appeared cheap, not expensive, actually, because the businesses were deteriorating faster than the sort of value investors were lowering their numbers. And in fact, many of those companies get in financial trouble. Everybody says be careful on shorting on valuation, right. And I think that's a good bromide. On the other hand, not factoring in valuation when you buy a stock can kill you too, and nobody ever says that. Right. And so I think that I would caution a lot of investors out there, whether or not you want to short stocks or not. And most of people viewing this show should not.
Should not,
but
absolutely.
You ought to take in valuation into account when you buy something, because it will matter at some point.
Jim, we talked earlier about the fact that you have long positions mostly as a hedge against some of your shorts. Microsoft. Mm-hmm. You're long Microsoft, right? We have actually, since the filing, gotten out of it. Why?
Variety of business reasons that I think Bloomberg has covered pretty well.
If you look at what Microsoft's doing today, $40 billion buyback, raising its dividend, does that, what message should that convey to an investor?
I'm very leery of tech companies that become value stocks. It just never seems to work.
But Apple is, in some people's eyes, trades like a value stock.
It trades like a value stock, but I don't think it's a value stock. I think Apple's still innovating and still is a pretty good consumer product.
So Apple doesn't deserve its value stock valuation, but Microsoft does.
And I'm not so sure Apple's a technology company as much as it is a consumer products company.
What is Microsoft then?
Microsoft is a tech company.
All right. Well,
is that because of the enterprise focus? Sorry, Steph.
Yeah.
Is that because of the enterprise focus? And so you say that Bloomberg has covered those issues well, and that's kind of you to say, but I wonder which issues stand out to you most about Microsoft that's changed.
I mean, I don't want to comment on Microsoft. We're not in position anymore. The point is that, going back to your opening remark, our longs are designed to basically be hedges for our shorts. So it depends what the shorts in the portfolio are as to how we construct the longs, not vice versa.